Welcome. Before there were kingdoms, before there were cities, there was a garden, a place of peace, beauty, and innocence where humanity first walked with God. But in the quiet of that garden, a question was asked, a choice was made, and everything began to change. The story of the fall is not just an ancient tale. It is the beginning of our story. A story of loss and longing, of shame and hope, of exile and the search for home. Today, we step back into those first moments to wonder what it might have felt like, and to ask what it still means for us now. In the beginning, the stories whisper of a garden, of a first man and woman, of choices that would shape all who came after. They are not told with every detail, but with glimpses, enough to sense both the beauty of what was given and the weight of what was lost. The voices, the questions, the silences, they leave us wondering what it must have felt like to take those first steps away from innocence, and how quickly love and fear, hope and grief began to weave into the fabric of human life. The fall of man in the stillness of Eden, where everything seemed whole, another voice entered. The serpent's words came not as force, but as a question, a seed of doubt. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Perhaps Eve hesitated. She knew the command, yet maybe she wondered why the tree was there at all if it wasn't meant for them. She answered truthfully, yes, all trees were permitted, except one, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Then came the challenge, you will not surely die. God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Was it temptation, curiosity, or the desire to be more than she was? The fruit looked harmless, even beautiful. Could it really carry so much weight? The bite that changed everything Eve reached. Perhaps her hand trembled, perhaps her heart raced. She took, tasted, and gave to Adam. And he, too, ate. The world did not collapse. The sky did not darken. But something within them shifted. Their eyes opened, not to glory, but to an uneasy awareness. They looked at one another and felt it. Nakedness, exposure, shame. A purity that once carried no weight now felt unbearable. They covered themselves with fig leaves, though leaves could never cover what had changed inside. For the first time in human history, they hid. The confrontation, then, the sound of God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. What once was joy became fear. They hid among the trees, as though branches could veil them from his presence. Where are you? God called. Adam's voice trembled. I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. God's question pierced. Have you eaten from the tree I commanded you not to eat from? And then came the unraveling. Adam pointing to Eve, Eve pointing to the serpent. Responsibility slipped into blame. Unity gave way to division. Innocence gave way to fear. Before the fall, Adam and Eve seemed to live in innocence, untouched by fear, guilt, or shame. Yet when they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, something subtle and irreversible may have stirred. Their eyes were opened, but perhaps not simply to sight, maybe to themselves, to their own fragility. What once felt natural suddenly seemed exposed. Did they cover themselves with fig leaves only to hide their bodies? Or was it an instinctive attempt to shield the truth that they had stepped beyond a boundary? It wasn't clear if the garden itself had changed. Perhaps it was only them. The harmony they once knew between themselves, creation, and their creator seemed fractured. When they hid from God in the cool of the day, was it fear, shame, or some new sense of distance they had never felt before? The pain may have begun even before they left Eden's gates. Was it the fear of punishment that gripped them, or the ache of losing what had always been theirs? For Eve, the curse of childbearing might have been more than physical. Maybe it was the weight of bringing life into a world where death now lingered. For Adam, the ground that once welcomed him now resisted. Thorns and sweat marked his labor. Yet perhaps the greatest pain was not toil, but distance. They had once walked with God face to face. Did that closeness now feel unreachable? Did every sunrise remind them of what had been lost, every shadow whisper of Eden? Perhaps their tears were less for what was to come and more for what could never be again. And yet, maybe in their suffering, they discovered a new form of love, one that endured pain and reached beyond regret. With the fruit came knowledge, but what kind? Was it clarity or only a restless awareness? They could now see right and wrong. But did that vision bring peace or only unease? Perhaps every choice now carried weight in a way it never had before. They might have found themselves second-guessing, doubting, regretting. Did knowledge give them wisdom, or simply the grief of knowing they had transgressed? Perhaps it was not the fruit itself, but the burden of choice that became their heaviest grief. Death, too, came quietly. God had warned, "You shall surely die." But did they understand what that meant? They still breathed, but perhaps something essential had already withered. Was it the connection to their Creator that had been severed? Did the world itself begin to dim, soil whispering of decay, their bodies carrying the weight of eventual dust? Maybe death was not a single moment, but a shadow, creeping silently across all they touched. The exile from Eden might have been more than just a relocation. Did they feel the silence when God's footsteps no longer echoed in the garden? Their garments of skin were perhaps both a mercy and a reminder of loss. Standing at the threshold, with the flaming sword sealing the way back, did they feel anger, despair, or only a numb finality? Perhaps Eden was not just a place, but a state of being, and once gone, could never be recovered. Every step into the unknown might have been weighed with memory. The scent of flowers they'd never smell again, the harmony they'd broken, the presence now felt at a distance. And maybe with that first bite, consciousness itself was born. Not simply awareness, but the restless kind, questioning, doubting, imagining futures and replaying pasts. Did they realize they were living, and in that realization, feel both awe and sorrow? Perhaps innocence had been simplicity, and knowledge brought complexity. Now they could build, dream, and create, but also fear, deceive, and mourn. Was this consciousness a gift meant to grow them, or a burden too heavy to bear? Perhaps it was both. Perhaps it still is. Cain's story in the shadow of possibility Genesis often focuses on a few named figures: Cain, Abel, Seth. Yet Genesis 5 verse 4 quietly notes, Adam had other sons and daughters. Adam lived 930 years, which suggests there could have been many generations already unfolding by the time Cain left Eden's vicinity. It's not clear if Cain was the first child, or simply the first named. Perhaps by the time of Abel's death, family lines had already multiplied, spreading out into nearby lands. So when Cain departed, he may not have stumbled into strangers, but rather distant relatives, though the text never gives us those details. When Genesis 4 verses 16 and 17 tells us, Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he named it Enoch after his son. Several questions naturally rise. Where did his wife come from? Who else lived in this city? How advanced could settlement have been at this early stage? The Hebrew word for a city may not mean what we picture today. Perhaps not towering buildings or organized streets, but a small settlement, a fortified camp, or simply a place where a cluster of families gathered. Cain may not have built in the way later civilizations did. Maybe he was only laying out the first traces of permanence: huts, walls, fire circles. His wife, too, may have been one of Adam and Eve's descendants. In such an early time, close intermarriage was likely unavoidable. But Scripture leaves this unspoken. leaving us to wonder. As for skills like farming or building, perhaps Adam and Eve, after exile, were forced to learn the basics of survival, making tools, crafting shelter, cultivating land. If so, their children may have refined those skills, passing them down until Cain himself had the knowledge to organize something resembling a city. Or maybe the impulse to build arose out of fear, a desire for safety, or to establish a mark of permanence in a world that now felt unstable. The unfolding of sin, what seems clearer is how quickly sin multiplied. Adam and Eve's first disobedience broke their peace with God, but by Cain's time, it had grown into envy and violence. God warned him that sin was crouching at the door, yet Cain gave in. Was it anger, jealousy, or simply a refusal to be corrected? Whatever the root, it ended in the first human death, not natural, but by human hands. Perhaps this was the point. Sin doesn't stay small. It begins in secrecy, desire, resentment, envy, and then grows outward until it shapes actions, families, and even entire communities. In just one generation, the shadow of the fall had extended from a garden to a grave. What might be suggested the story doesn't give every detail. It doesn't chart how many people were born, how tools were made, or how settlements were raised. Maybe Cain City was little more than a camp. Maybe his wife was one of his many unnamed sisters. Maybe generations had already spread farther than the text records. The Bible gives us glimpses, not blueprints. It tells us enough to see that human life was unfolding, children being born, skills emerging, families growing, while sin was also deepening its hold. The rest is left in silence, where we can only imagine how early humanity survived, built, and struggled under the weight of what had been lost.